somebody for whom a concept emerging from aesthetics, from literature, has been the foundation of his work. And so I found it to be an exciting venture to see what kind of wings a concept coming from literature has for the organizational world. So having said that, let me introduce Anil, whose dissertation topic is negative capability, which is a phenomenological. Anil, I look forward to hearing your presentation once more, and I know that those online are
And just so everybody knows, there are some background noises and stuff, and the problem we're having is Bob is joining via his phone because of a technology glitch. So if I can request everybody to please not type on their keyboards, it's very, very distracting, and we're not going to get a clean recording. So would you please refrain from typing and just stay in a corner of the office or whatever where it's not too noisy. I really appreciate that. Thank you for your cooperation.
Anil, this is Steve. Another suggestion I'd make is that you can mute everyone else on the call while you're speaking.
Yeah, you know what? The problem is I can do that, but if I mute everyone, Bob gets muted too.
That's okay.
All right, good. Okay, so all right, so I'm going to go. Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you, Steve. So I'll do that. Bob's muted, and including everybody else. So let me just start with my presentation. This is the FOR. Fielding refers to the terminology final oral review, which other institutes might call a dissertation defense. So it's analogous. All right. So just please know that this is the end of my doctoral journey. And what I'm doing is I'm presenting my research to you. So please have your questions ready. And if you want to put them in the chat box, please do so. I may not be able to field every question. We're of course going to give the committee members an opportunity first to ask any questions that they might have for me, and with time remaining, we'll try to cover the other questions. And those that cannot be covered, I can certainly take them offline, just in the interest of the time boundary. All right. So with that said, let me just start. The topic of my study is negative capability, a phenomenological study of lived experience at the edge of certitude and incertitude. Certitude meaning certainty, and incertitude meaning uncertainty. All right. So let's go to the next slide. This was an expression that was coined by the famous English romantic poet John Keats in 1817, and he used the expression, interestingly, only once in a letter to his brothers. And here's what he said: I mean, negative capability, that is, when man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. So this is an expression that he used when thinking about his role model, William Shakespeare. So he felt that William Shakespeare had this capacity to be open to sensation, open to thoughts, feelings, and emotions of others, both as a poet and as a writer, literary writer. And so he wanted to sort of emulate that. So he was referring to Shakespeare and uses the expression negative capability. As you look at negative capability, the one thing that will jump out at you is it's a very peculiar expression, because one would think that negative and capability are two words that seem to cancel each other out, right? Because we do not attribute anything positive to the word negative in the conventional sense, and capabilities are typically thought of in terms of what we can do, how quickly we can get things done, expertise, knowledge, and whatnot. All right. So in order to understand that better, I dug a little deeper into that. And while Keats did not use these expressions that on this slide that I have, this is my interpretation, this is my understanding based on the literature review that I did and based on the conversations I've had for many, many years on the concept of negative capability with colleagues. So suggests a peculiar capacity for containment, all right, to live with and tolerate ambiguity and paradox and remain content with half knowledge. Wow, it must be so easy to do, right? Well, this is a capacity that is not clearly easy to accomplish, all right, or certainly difficult to master. It enables one to tolerate anxiety and stay in uncertainty in order to allow for new thoughts and perceptions to emerge. So, when one is able to be in that negative capability frame of mind, one has the capacity to be and to stay with the anxiety, with the uncertainty, without the need to do away with that, or without the need to fix that situation. So we can stay with our own thoughts and perceptions, kind of being in a liminal space. You're neither here nor there. You're standing at the edge of the boundary, but you're also on both ends of the boundary. It allows one to engage in a non-defensive way with change, all right, without being overwhelmed by the pressure to react. Okay. And in today's day and age, in the contemporary organization, everything is about let's get the job done. It's about urgency, deadlines, and orders to get things accomplished, projects. So the time for really reflecting, thinking, ruminating has been considerably diminished. So I thought I'd go to the next slide and share with you that in order to understand better this expression, this peculiar expression, negative capability, it may be wise to look at the expressions negative and positive as they relate to each other and as they overall relate to the concept. So positive, as I was just saying a little bit earlier, is how much we know, okay, how much we can get done, and how quickly we can arrive at decisions, which we're all familiar with that, with the pressures and deadlines that we have to meet today. So it's about, you know, we have a problem and somebody moves in to fill that space with answers, with resolutions, with fixes. And, your leader might say, hey, that's a great job. But nobody really tells you to be opening that space a little bit longer, or even if they do, the tendency is to quickly fill that space with how much we know. It's a human tendency. It's actually endemic to the human condition. We are comfortable with what we know and generally uncomfortable with what we don't know. So negative, the connotation is not the opposite of positive. It does not really mean a deficiency in a sense, which one would think the word negative to be. But it is about how much we don't know. So the negative in this sense is the unknowing of something. All right. It starts with an empty space to the extent that we can create that space while resisting the urge to disperse into action. And I'll talk about disperse a little bit later. But just think of dispersal as um, rationalization, any other defensive behavior where you try to get rid of the anxiety, get rid of the uncertainty somehow by doing something about it. So when the anxiety and uncertainty are particularly high, uh, we're not comfortable with not knowing and not doing. All right. So just think of the dialectical tension between the positive and the negative, between how much we know, how much we can get done, and on the other hand, how much we don't know, creating this empty space and resisting the urge to disperse into action when our anxiety and uncertainty are particularly high. So just for right now, just think of this as a dialectical tension. A dialectical is, again, I don't want to get into the real definition of dialectical tension, but dialectics is anything that is at odd juxtaposition with each other. You know, love and hate, autonomy, and working in a group together, togetherness. So things of that nature, when we are conflicted in trying to hold those polarities, all right, and sometimes those polarities are contradictory and therefore difficult to hold. Sometimes they're complementary and difficult to hold. Life is about a paradox. We cannot go through life until we have that capacity to be able to hold both, but it's not an easy situation to be in. So let me get into the post-industrial society and how negative capability and plays a role. So let's fast forward 200 years. John Keats used the expression in the year 1817. So roughly about 200 years later, in 2014, you might wonder, hey, what is the relevance of a poetic aesthetic concept in today's day and age? How does that even apply? Um, and I started to think about that, and as I was preparing this presentation, I came across an article that was written by Brent Russo, and I have the reference, by the way, at the end of this presentation. All the references are at the end, so you don't have to worry. If you need the presentation, I can always send that to you later. But Russo 2014 suggests that paradoxes are fundamental to creativity. All right. So that part we understand, because in the creative process, everything is not cut and dry. We have to hold different tensions. Everybody's heard of the expression creative tension. But he goes further to suggest that there is a dialectical tension between freedom and constraint in the creative process. And that, I thought, was particularly interesting, because theorists traditionally think of the creative process as typically unstructured, open-ended, and free from external limitations. Rousseau found that there is a dialectical tension between freedom and constraint, meaning that even though conventionally we think of creativity as really being unleashed when there's a lack of structure, everybody's open-minded and free from external limitation, he is suggesting through his research that actually by imposing constraints, both internal and external constraints on a team, and he's typically written about the R&D teams in that particular article, but it's very interesting, because it was the first time I really came across this notion that constraints, when imposed, uh, sensibly imposed on a team, can actually get the team to be working together more creatively and be able to produce better quality work. So without going too deep into the article, I just wanted to share with you what I thought got stirred up for me. Because when I look at negative capability, I think of it as a form of internal constraint. Is it not? You are pulled in the direction of doing, in the direction of knowledge, expertise, and there's another part of you that is saying, well, let me refrain from that. Let me stay with the not knowing. Let me stay with the not doing and see what emerges. So let's take the example of a team that's working together. And if the team is always emphasizing what they know and the expertise, there is no space there for to do anything else. Everything gets filled up in that space. So if the team were to use a concept like negative capability as an internal constraint, as a capacity that they cultivate and are able to manifest in their work, I would think that that concept has relevance today in our day and age today that we live in. So I'll just say that much about this slide right now. let me go to the next question. Everybody might be wondering, what was my research question? So this is really interesting. When I looked at negative capability, one of the hardest things that I found was how to craft a research question around something so eclectic and something totally, abstract. And the committee members will testify to this. What a struggle I had from the stage of the concept paper to the proposal in building the research question. And well, finally, we got it down. So, my research question is, what is it like for leaders to be in a state of negative capability during periods of uncertainty and conflict in the workplace? So it is directed to leaders and to determine how they made sense of negative capability during periods of uncertainty and conflict. All right. So that's my research question. Um, my literature review was given the nature of the inquiry, the nature of the topic. It was very hard on the one hand to look for something specifically addressing negative capability. So as I did the literature review, I found many references to negative capability obviously in the poetic literature, in the aesthetic literature, and of course there was some contemporary writing that was done by Robert French and his associates at the University of the West of England. But other than that, I found only very sporadic references. So that was the difficult part. But on the other hand, when I expanded my scope, looking at this concept and saying, what are some of the aspects of negative capability that are perhaps addressed in the literature? All right. So dialogism and dialectics, uncertainty. Clearly, it's a very uncertain state. There are levels of abstraction, etc. So, given the very multidisciplinary and eclectic nature of the topic, I started to look at these different fields of inquiry which shed light on the phenomena of negative capability, directly or indirectly. And again, these references are available at the end of the end of the presentation. All right, so I'll say that much about this right now. Let me go to the next slide. My research methodology. As many of you who are researchers and academics, you very well know that any methodology, by its very nature, must be an approach that helps you answer your research question. So it has to be something that you can work with, that also, in a sense, suits your own style, your own outlook toward life, and what you're looking for. So in my search, I realized early enough, of course, I did not pin it down, but I knew that I was gravitating to negative capability, perhaps for the reason that it was a phenomenon. It was a concept that I felt gripped by, that I was totally absorbed by for many, many years. And as I read the literature, I started to realize that there was something about negative capability that was incredibly intriguing to me. So I started to think that perhaps I should be looking at phenomenological inquiry as a means of doing it. Now, within the general field of phenomenology, there are many, many approaches and many ways of looking at the phenomena. And I wanted, as a new researcher, and I'll be very honest, I to say that for me, I wanted a turnkey process, a process that was structured, tried, and tested by theorists and researchers, and something that I could replicate. Okay, because it's hard enough to be a doctoral student, and it's even harder than to look at a phenomena that's so abstract. All right, so I determined that this was, with the help of my committee, we came to the understanding that I could use the interpretative phenomenological analysis, a little bit twist on that. It was a British, the British use interpretative and we use interpretive in the States, but I'm using the term that was used by the developer of that methodology, Jonathan Smith. And they developed this at the University of the West of England. They're all, by the way, psychologists who developed this. So it is a psychological approach. Now, just moving on to the next bullet point, it says IPA rests on three foundations: A, phenomenology; B, hermeneutics; and C, ideography. So let me just briefly tell you what I understand by phenomenology. It is the understanding the essence and structure of consciousness as experienced from the first person point of view. The central structure for phenomena is its intentionality, i.e., it is directed towards something. It is not about describing or explaining something, but rather understanding the experience at its very core. The major theorists of phenomenology, and there are many, but I'm just going to name a few: Husserl, Heidegger, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Schutz. Moving on to hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is the theory of text interpretation, be it written, verbal, or non-verbal. Major theorists are Gadamer, Ricoeur, Dilthey, and Schleiermacher. Okay, these are all philosophers that have written extensively about hermeneutics. And ideography is based on Immanuel Kant's expression the description as a tendency to specify the meaning of uncertain, contingent, and novel subjective phenomena. So in psychology, ideography is the study of an individual seen as a unique agent with a unique life history that sets him or her apart from others. And the method used is narrative account, which is retrospective, meaning it's referring to the past experiences. And it does not attempt to prove, disprove, validate, or refute any hypothesis or extant theories. So that in itself was very novel, and IPA has the emphasis on novelty, originality, creativity, and you can well imagine why I would be drawn to that. Right? So just moving on to the next slide. Again, I just mentioned why it's a turnkey process. It's a step-by-step approach to qualitative data collection and analysis when the emphasis is on novelty and creativity. The I in IPA is the interviewer. So the I is the interviewer, the P is the participant, and together we co-create the analysis. All right. So this is a little bit different in my view, and I'm not the expert on all other phenomenological methods, but in my discussions with colleagues and in my readings, I find that a lot of times phenomenology is done by the researcher, the data is collected, and the researcher is independently analyzing it. In IPA, it's a co-creation. It's a joint product of the researcher and the leader together. So when I say participant, I'm meaning folks, the leaders that are interviewed. So the IPA has an ideographic focus, which means how an individual in a given situation or context makes sense of a given phenomena. Okay. So how an individual in a given context makes sense of a given phenomena. The double hermeneutic process is the researcher is making sense. The researcher, as in myself, I was making sense of how the leaders were making sense of negative capability. So you can well imagine that there's a double layer there. All right. My understanding of the leader and the leader's understanding of the phenomena. All right. So it's an indirect way of getting to the phenomena. All right. So IPA is different from other methods because of its combination of psychological, interpretative, and ideographic components. All right. The next point, and this is a very important aspect that I want to spend a little bit of time discussing, it's about this concept of researcher reflexivity, which is a self-referential focus. Uh, while there is general knowledge out there that qualitative research is, it's a very reflexive process. There's a lot of great deal of uncertainty and whatnot. I found that in IPA, when I say IPA, by the way, it is the same methodology, interpretative phenomenological analysis. I'm only using the acronym IPA just for short. Okay. So in IPA, it's very, very critical that the researcher makes direct references to how she or he is impacting that process of research. Okay. And to then explicitly narrate in the dissertation the impact of the self on the study and the impact of the self on the interpretative process, and also share the experiences of conducting the research. And I guess it is also from the standpoint that others who are looking at the same methodology would sort of take some cues from that, from the experiences. I certainly have taken a number of cues from other researchers who have conducted studies doing IPA. As a matter of fact, in chapter 3 of my dissertation, the research methodology, I have highlighted 2 case studies where I have used, the knowledge from the other folks and their experiences with research using that methodology. Now, inductive, I just want to talk a little bit about the inductive part here, the inductive interpretation. What is inductive? Inductive can be used very loosely, and it also can be used in a very specialized way. But inductive, as it means for phenomenology, it means going from particular to broader generalizations. So you take specific accounts of individuals from the interviews, and then you make some broader generalizations. However, philosophically, inductive reasoning is a little more nuanced than it is inherently uncertain and does not attempt to prove, disprove, validate, or refute any existing theories of analysis. And also, while doing this interpretation, it is done at 2 levels: hermeneutics of description, which means as I interview the participants, as I transcribe the data, I look at what the leader is saying, all right, with very little participation from me, all right, especially at that stage of the analysis. I'm taking exactly what they're saying, and further in the presentation, I'll share with you some of the excerpts from the interviews that I think you'll find very interesting as they enlighten that phenomenon. So the hermeneutics of description is purely what that participant or leader said. The hermeneutics of suspicion, on the other hand, is what lay beneath the surface of that phenomenon. So as I look at the data, while most of my interpretation is grounded in the data, some of my interpretations, as you can well imagine, will have to come from my paradigmatic frameworks, my ideologies, my worldviews, which come into play when I interpret something. It's kind of like all of us going out making sense of life. We don't just make sense of life. When we look at a tree, we don't just make sense of a tree from the way the tree appears, but also from the way it appears to us, the way we see the tree through our lenses. So I just want to leave it at that. The descriptive in IPA, it calls for a descriptive, linguistic, and conceptual level of analysis. And here I just want to make a quick comment through my own experience of conducting this study, that even though IPA suggests that corpuses be very small, no more than 5 to 7 interviews, we came to an agreement in the committee that I would conduct 15 interviews. Right. So with that, you can well imagine 15 interviews, 90 minutes long each interview, generate a volume of data that's enormous. And to be able to weed through that and make those interpretations at all 3 levels is extremely difficult. So while I tried the descriptive, linguistic, and conceptual, I will say that I was not able to successfully look at each narrative. When I say narrative, each case that I did with every leader at all those three levels. It's very, very hard to do that because convergence and divergences have become very, very difficult as the number of participants increases. As the corpus becomes greater than 5 to 7 participants, it becomes extremely difficult to do that analysis. All right. The next, we are all people that know about phenomenology know the importance of bracketing assumptions. And bracketing, this word bracketing, is no more than setting aside your own assumptions, your convictions, your own frameworks, the way you look at the world, so that it does not impede upon the process of research. All right. So the jury's still out whether pure bracketing is even possible to do. I happen to think that there is no such thing as pure bracketing because we are likely to bring some of our own assumptions, and maybe not manifestly, but also tacitly we bring to bear that. But in IPA, it's very, very novel that even though they are suggesting, they meaning the researchers are suggesting, that you bracket your assumptions and state them in your dissertation, they also allow for the data for your own paradigmatic framework and assumptions to enter the analysis part. So there's a difference between data collection and data analysis. In the data collection stage, you are to the extent possible not bringing your assumptions and paradigmatic lenses into it. But when you're doing the analysis and the interpretation, you're very likely bringing your paradigmatic framework, which I did in my study. It follows the hermeneutic circle. Sorry about that. The hermeneutic circle is looking at parts in relation to the whole and also the whole in relation to its parts. So what do I mean by that? So when I transcribed all the interviews myself, I did not outsource that. I used the InkScribe software to help me with the transcription process. But I did not use any software to actually do the analysis. I wanted to do the analysis manually. But as I looked at the transcripts, I looked at the verbatim accounts that I transcribed. These are narratives in individual cases. And then I looked then at each narrative. And as I did the group analysis, I looked at the entire group corpus and what the corpus was talking about in terms of that. And then looked at the corpus as a whole and went back into the parts. So this back and forth from the transcript, individual narrative to the group analysis, and from the group analysis back to the individual narrative is what they're talking about when they talk about hermeneutic circle. Okay. Now, selection criteria. As I reached the stage when I wanted to actually enter the study, we do what is known as a pilot. For those of you that are not in the academia part, pilot is just something. It's a test run in a manner of speaking. So it's a prototype that you're doing to see if there is anything that can be improved, revised, deleted, or added before you enter the full study. So I conducted the pilot with 3 participant leaders from 2 or 3 different contexts, and when I did that, I had to clearly have selection criteria. And on this slide, you will see the selection criteria. Participants were recruited from academia, private practice, and business organizations. The reason I did that was, even though the focus of the study was not on context, it was interesting to see. I was speculating that perhaps if people I recruit from different contexts, it becomes a triangulated study. So rather than having everybody from psychotherapy or everyone from Buddhism or everyone from business organizations, why not have 5 participants each from each of those 3 settings? So it was a form of triangulation. Age range, of course, that's a no-brainer, 35 to 65, employed or self-employed in the case of private practitioner, and had 5 years of experience at the place of work. Now, in the next and I talk about familiar with the notion of negative capability. I just want to share with you um, this because I think it's important to understand. Uh, you might be wondering, how would I determine if these participants, were familiar with the notion of negative capability? Clearly, we send out the consent form. Before that, I send out the preliminary email inquiry. I have some phone calls, some email exchanges with them. But people say yes, they understand that. But it was also important for me where there was a problem or a query from a prospective participant. I got on the phone with them or just through email exchanges, clarified what negative capability was. And actually, in two or three different communications, I had already extrapolated that and spelt it out, sort of in the form of in a blurb. What this is what negative capability is. This is how John Keats coined the expression, whatnot. And then the other criteria was should have experienced significant anxiety around one situation at work where they found themselves to be in a state of uncertainty and conflict. This again was very, very important for me to determine, and I wanted to make sure that the participants that I'm getting for the study actually have had I mean, I would be surprised if nobody's had any conflict and uncertainty, but I wanted to very specifically make sure that they were currently in a state of uncertainty or conflict. Of course, they all had to be comfortable sharing their experiences with the researcher, i.e., myself, in a one-on-one setting. Agreed to sign the informed consent form and be willing to have the conversations digitally recorded and shared in the dissertation with prior consent. For those of you that are not academics, and some of them joining here are not academics, you will just please know that anytime we are working with human subjects, the Institutional Review Board, which is IRB, requires us to go through a form of education and to make sure that we're not psychologically damaging or hurting or injuring the human subjects that we are going to be conducting research with. So all participants, these leaders, all signed an informed consent form and were willing to have the conversations digitally recorded. So just enough of on that aspect. All right. So let me move to the next one. So my study design, as I said, the pilot study was conducted via semi-structured interviews with 3 leaders on the GoToMeeting web platform. All right. And I will just take a minute here to share with you why I chose GoToMeeting. In today's day and age, everything's so digitalized. And I wanted to conduct this study in a setting which is as closely simulated to the actual environment that we work in today. Today, human interaction has given way to digital interaction, to web-based communication, just the kind of communication we're doing right now. Traditionally, dissertation defenses were done with a panel face to face, and you'd be meeting. But I'm doing this on a web platform, and I'm sure all of you probably are, even as we speak, are looking at their phones and looking at the data and email and whatnot. So there is a whole plethora of things that are happening in our worlds that are more digital, more technology based than actual human interaction. So the GoToMeeting web platform was a wonderful way for me to sort of like create a setting as close to reality as was possible. All right. So it also provides a very seamless digital recording, which is easy to transcribe and analyze because you have a audio record of that. You can play it and play it back and listen to it and stop it and pause it. So that's a wonderful opportunity to do that. So my study design, when I say study design versus the pilot, this is the pilot study. This is the study we conducted only with 3 participants on the GoToMeeting platform. But based on the findings of this, the study design was created. And one of the things that emerged for me in the pilot study was they in the three participants that I interviewed talked about several different themes, but clearly, given the small number of participants, three, none of those themes were common among the participants. So there was no common emergent themes there. However, for the data that I gathered from that helped me better understand how I could design the actual study. And the study design was based on the results of the pilot. Semi-structured interviews were conducted with 15 leaders. One participant dropped out of the study. Her data are not included. But I do mention this just for you to know that things like that do happen. People change their minds, and anytime someone backs out of the study, we do not make references to anything that he or she may have said. All those records are destroyed after a certain amount of time, and no data or actual verbatim accounts are included in the study. Okay. I just mentioned earlier that interviews were transcribed by me using the InkScribe software. Data analysis was conducted by me manually. And there was a reason I conducted, again, the data analysis manually, because I think, as I previously mentioned, reflexivity is so critical in analysis. And I wanted to make sure that the sensitivity was not lost, because people shared a dramatic amount of the huge amount of very personal, very, very sensitive data with me in the analysis. And I wanted to make sure that I did not miss that out by deferring that process to some software who doesn't know who these participants were and just looking for common words. So anyway, enough said about that. Let me go to when I said IPA is a turnkey process, what I meant was they have prescribed a 5-step approach to data analysis and interpretation. Now, different people researching make different variations of this, but I wanted to take, as a novice researcher, I wanted to take a prescribed approach that they had. So individual case narratives are clearly, the 14 people, the 14 leaders that I had interviewed, listing of the themes that emerge from cases. So when you're doing the individual case narrative analysis, you discover certain themes that emerge from those cases. Now, it's interesting, in IPA, the theorists refer to them as cases or case studies even. And in our own committee, this thing had come up about whether we should use the word expression cases or not. And I just decided that I would stay with the expression that they would use. So we dropped the word study and actually just kept it cases. I know it can be misleading because a case study can mean different things to different people. The three was clustering of themes. So based on all the themes that you create, you cluster the themes under certain subtitles or headings or categories. And then you create a master listing of group level superordinate themes. So the clustering of themes is a comprehensive cluster, entire cluster. From that, you distill it further and you come to a master listing of group level superordinate themes. And it is from these group level superordinate themes that you then create the combined group narrative. All right. So in order to illustrate for you, and I know it's not possible in this presentation to share more than I already have in these slides, because just given the interest of time, but I wanted to share with you two important themes. One is sense of self and identity. So these are from the individual case narratives, all right? And what I've done is I've excerpted two narratives from the transcripts. And for the first person, the leader, here's what she said. The bigger challenge for me is how to be an American leader in an Indonesian run American company. my identity as a leader. Everyone reminds me that I'm an expatriate. My context is Indonesian. So my dilemma is, what part of me still applies in this context? All right. So here the leader is struggling with making sense of self and identity. So, even though you're working for an American company, you're an expatriate, so you're working overseas, you're working in a predominantly Muslim country, even though it's, not radical Muslim, but it is a Muslim country nonetheless. The lady herself that I've referred to here is Jewish in origin. So she is sort of like, coached to sort of keep her Jewish descent a little bit down, to not bring that out too much. The fact that she's a woman in a predominantly male organization, to keep that sort of underplayed. So here's a leader who's working there and dealing with all these issues on a day in and day out basis and trying to make sense of the identity. Let's look at the other excerpt. This is from another lady that I interviewed, and she talks about a terminology called workplace bullying. Okay, so she is clearly being subjected to something that she considers persecutory in the workplace, and she feels that she's been bullied. And unfortunately, she's not able to speak up or speak about those issues with anyone, because the people that are subjecting her to that form of, and she at one point called it torture, are the folks that she reports to directly. So she feels what part of her still applies, and then she shuts down, gets into a survival mode. So her survival instincts become really strong. All right, because it's interesting to read about people who live through horrific abuse from someone close to them, and you wonder how they come out on the other side. So as you'll see, these two cases talk about constructing a sense of self and identity, and more than the construction itself is the challenge with making sense of the self and identity that I think is very, very, very difficult. So let me just look at the next slide. um, Intermingling of personal and professional life. All right. First of all, I think that no one can truly compartmentalize their personal and professional lives. It may be with noble lie we tell each other that what happened at home can be separate from work. This is very interesting, because when I asked them the question, and here's what my question was to the leaders: can you tell me about a time when you found it hard to determine certain experiences? Okay. And what was it about those experiences that made it particularly difficult for you? And so these excerpts are taken from there. Just in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into any further detail about this, just to make sure, because I have other things to cover. But I just wanted to share with you how individuals, intermingling of a personal and professional life, making sense of self and identity, how these themes emerge from individual transcripts. Okay. So let me go into based on the individual themes, we created what is known as the superordinate themes, the group level challenges, if you will, exercising servant leadership, intermingling of personal and professional life, so forth and so on. So we had about 9 themes, which were superordinate. These are themes that were derived from the entire corpus. All right. And based on this, I conducted a group analysis. And interestingly, a major finding that I discovered from the group analysis was that the majority of leaders interviewed appear to have a diminished capacity to contain uncertainty when faced with paradoxical dilemmas. So in these situations, they resort to behaviors such as problem solving, consulting others, shutting down, and dispersing as a means of defending against the uncertainty. All right. So when I conducted the analysis of the entire group, all right, what came out very strongly, this is one of the major themes, that the leaders, when they were called into, when they had to be in a situation, they were in a predicament, They were trying to hold polarities, paradox, as opposed to staying with the uncertainty, holding and containing that uncertainty. What they seemed to do was to reach out, either to get into a problem solving mode, consult others. In some cases, they shut down emotionally, all right, because in a heightened conflict type situation. And many folks just dispersed, ended up in a string of rationalization, trying to make sense of the situation, trying to exit from the organization versus just holding the anxiety and holding the tension within oneself. So that was the first finding. The other findings and strongly emerging themes have been the context in which a leader is embedded does not have a significant bearing on the way. I discovered that even though I had recruited people from academia, private practice, and business organizations, I did not see that the context actually played a significant role, because in none of those interviews did I find that somebody said, oh, because I work in academia or because I'm in a business organization, this is why I feel the way I do. This is why I have a diminished capacity to hold the anxiety and the uncertainty. So this was one of the findings. And again, as I previously mentioned, the study was not focused on the context per se. Okay, but this just came out of the study. In IPA, they ask us to look for a not look for it in the sense that you go seeking out, but be open to deviant findings, something that does not directly relate to the phenomena that you're researching. In this case, negative capability, but something that emerges quite accidentally, quite spontaneously in your interviews, that has a relationship that's complementary in a sense. And what I discovered was negative capability and obsessive compulsive disorder sort of share a relationship. And this was, by the way, shared with me in my very first interview with a leader. And as I started the presentation, I was talking about negative capability being a capacity to stay with mysteries, doubts, and uncertainty without the irritable reaching after fact and reason. And obsessive compulsive disorder is a condition. When one is afflicted with that condition, one finds it hard to control certain recurring ritualistic impulses. And, you know, one gets into a ritualistic behavior to alleviate the anxiety on the one hand, but in doing that, in repeating that ritual, you actually perpetuate the anxiety. So it's kind of like a vicious circle that gets formed. And it's very hard to break out of that. Anybody that gets in between that behavior and the ritual is really, really having a lot of problems. Gets into a lot of problems. So this is something that came out as a deviant finding, and I wanted to share this. Another one that I wanted to share quickly was servant leadership and the intermingling of personal and professional lives. These are strongly emerging themes, and I want to just talk a little bit very quickly about servant leadership. When I asked the question in my schedule, how do you see yourself as a leader? It was surprising that almost 12 of the 14 or 15 participants referred to their own style as that of a servant leader. However, it was also very interesting to see that when they found themselves in certain situations where ideally one would think a servant leader may be able to contain those anxieties, they were not able to do so. So it's kind of like, Chris Argyris's theory X and theory Y. It's the differential between the espoused theories and the practice theories in an organization. We say we want to do a certain thing, and we actually end up doing something quite different. All right, it's just part of human nature. So this was an aspect which I found quite interesting in this study. And again, the intermingling of personal and professional lives, I was not researching particularly that aspect, but that is something that hopefully, in future research could be looked at. Let me just go to the next slide really quick. In the discussion, leaders in highly uncertain and perplexing situations become instruments of action versus instruments of thoughtful reflection. So there is a dialectic right there for you, right? So when called upon in urgent situations, they spring into action, all right, rather than sit with and thoughtfully reflect on that predicament. The second point is research scholars, especially those that are engaged in qualitative studies, may find that the practice of negative capability provides a means of holding their anxieties and tensions in what can be a very messy process that is replete with uncertainty. I certainly came to that, I wouldn't say a conclusion, but an understanding of having gone through that process for a very, very long time and found myself in quagmires, messes, mud pits, and black holes throughout that process. So it is both interesting, intriguing, but also quite painful to go through. The practice of negative capability presents a strange paradox as we attempt to hold two contrasting and conflicting attitudes together, resulting in a state of tension. And what makes the predicament even harder is that the two positions, which are polarities, may not necessarily present us with an easy choice. And either or, they very often are complementary and interdependent, not mutually exclusive. All right. Future research and application. I'm going to go really quickly through these slides. I would like to, based on the findings and based on what I've experienced in this study with leaders who have shared their experiences with me, I would like to develop a negative capability 360-degree leadership assessment instrument down the road in collaboration with other scholars, because I think it's an important competency for leaders to master. The deployment of leadership, the deployment of negative capability with teams striving for creativity and innovation is something I will look at a little more closely as I think about where to take this further. Also partner hopefully with mental health professionals to develop negative capability as a cognitive behavioral therapy tool to alleviate the suffering of OCD patients. This of course, I'm not a mental health professional, but I have had some studies in psychoanalysis. So if I can team up with mental health professionals willing to use the research to provide some avenues for these folks, that'll be great. So this is just a schematic representation of negative capability tool. I'm not going to go too much with that, but if you notice, authenticity, comfort with ignorance, patient observation, reserving judgment, tolerance for ambiguity, servant leadership, empathy, and awareness of situational dynamics. These are some aspects of negative capability, as you can well imagine, that would be worthwhile including in a 360 feedback tool. So perhaps, I can have a negative capability training intervention with an organization and conduct this prior to that, administer the instrument prior to the intervention, and then conduct it again once we've had a chance to work with the leaders on those behaviors. Just redefining negative capability in postmodern times. So nearly 200 years after its coinage, the capability seems to be raised by scholars to almost a canonical status. What is interesting to me is, as I look into the literature, more and more people are thinking about negative capability now. So there is no finality. There is no such thing as a straight answer to that. It raises more questions than it really provides any answers. It may be, and as I look at this and as I try to think through this and construct this in my mind in postmodern times, it may be that in postmodern times, we need to think of negative capability as a state of questioning and allow ourselves to be guided by inquiry while resisting the temptation to seek answers. Okay. In attempting to understand something by reaching for the doctrine of knowledge, we're taking flight into the world of certitude that is ephemeral at best. We're once again thrust into paradoxical dilemmas that are unavoidable. I like this quote by Stephen Batchelor, who's a Zen Buddhist scholar, and he suggests that where there's great questioning, there is great awakening. Where there's little questioning, there is little awakening. Where there is no questioning, there is no awakening. So perhaps in contemporary times, all we can really do in this context is stay in the present, or to the extent possible, without regressing to the past or fleeing into the future to, in order to fix the situation. Okay. Okay. So with that, I am done with my presentation. I'm sorry we had a little bit of a late start, but I want to quickly acknowledge some people that have played a pivotal role in my odyssey, this 11-year odyssey at Fielding. My family, of course, my beloved wife, Marilyn, my daughter, Ratna, who's a physician at Sloan Kettering in New York City, and Priya Bahal, who's a third-year student at Boston University. Of course, what can I say? My committee chair, my partner in crime, Dr. Robert Silverman, without whom I would not be sitting here today. Bob prodded me when I had left Fielding in 2006 and said that he would not have any exchanges with me unless I came back and finished what I'd started. I think that was the best advice that I could have taken from Bob. So thank you, Bob, for being my mentor, my friend, my guide, and my steward through all this entire process. Of course, what can I say? The committee members, Annabelle Nelson, Steve Shapiro, Sharon Davis Brown, and Amy Frere, all have played a absolutely amazing part in shaping me as a scholar. And there have been times when I've just felt, hey, what the heck am I doing here? Let me get the hell out of here. I'm the author of my own misery. All right. And they kept supporting me through the process. They kept holding me, containing my tensions, my anxieties in a way that was both academically challenging, but also extremely stimulating. So thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of my heart, okay, for all the tireless hours you spent working with me from the standpoint of the concept paper and then moving on to the onto the proposal and to the final dissertation. So again, I could not have done this without you. Fielding colleagues, Michael Joseph Sarabian, PhD, Steve Wallace, Susan Quashma, and Michele Vincenti. Wonderful, wonderful guys at a time when I was struggling incredibly to make sense of this journey. You graciously reached out to me with your sources, with your deliverables, with all the support that you could give me. So I cannot begin to even thank you for your tremendous participation in this journey for me. And of course, last but not least, my study participants. Of course, I cannot name them for obvious reasons, for confidentiality, but if you are in this meeting, please know how much I appreciate all the sharing that you've conducted. And again, my dedication would not be complete without sharing with you the love, the joy that I received through the years from my late mother-in-law, Christine Pinto, who passed away about 5 or 6 years ago. And she and Bob Silverman may have been actually shaking hands because she prodded me to reach out for my goals and to actually finish this up. So I know she's smiling upon me from there, up there, and I know she's looking down upon me and saying, hey, you know what, Anil, you did it. And so, Mummy, this one's for you. I could not have done it without your support. I'm sorry. And this is just a piece that I wrote. Out of the mud of chaos, uncertainty, and doubt grows the lotus, unstained as it were by certitude and the doctrinaire of knowledge. This is the selected references for all the pieces that I've just talked about. And with that, I turn it over to Bob. So I'm going to unmute all. Bob, are you there?
I am here. Thank you.
Okay, sir.
It was a fabulous presentation, Anil.
Thank you so much, Bob.
It really was fabulous. So I think you can keep me. I think you can keep me unmuted, but you can mute other people. Is that
Yeah,
possible?
but Bob, I cannot see your name, so I don't know how you signed up.
You don't know which one I am.
Yeah, I don't know which one you are.
So if other people could mute themselves,
what I'm going to
that would
do
help.
is.
Yeah, would everybody just mute yourself so that I can actually find out where Bob is hiding?
Yeah, let me. I think the best way to do this.
Wait, but Bob, is this you? Did you sign up as Anil?
This is me.
Okay. So I am not. I cannot figure.
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Okay, so Bob, there's no easy way to know
Okay,
this.
let me just have you. Let me have you identify the committee members and open the questioning up. Okay, Anil?
Yes.
That's the best way.
Yes, let's do that. Let me do this. Let me mute all. Okay, Bob, if that's okay with you, then I'll unmute selectively the committee member that wants to say something. Okay?
Yeah, please.
All right. So I'm gonna just go ahead and mute all, but I'll move it over to each of the committee members and then say what they'd like to say. All right, starting from the top. All right. Okay, so let me first begin right up top with, I'm going to start from the top all the way down to the bottom. Let me first go to Amy Frere and see what Amy would like to say. Amy, can you unmute yourself if you can? Okay, this is going to be a little puzzling here. Okay, let me go to Annabelle. Okay, let's try it. Annabelle, you're on.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Great.
Okay, well, congratulations.
Oh, thank you, Annabelle. Appreciate it.
What a tour de force here.
I don't know.
Certainly, you have made the transition to a PhD. Such scholarly work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all your support.
Yeah, and I've been interested in your topic from the beginning because, of course, it overlaps a couple areas that I have done a lot of work in. For example, creativity. A given with creativity is you need to tolerate ambiguity and have divergent thinking.
Yes.
Also overlapping most Eastern spiritual practices on the path towards either enlightenment or wisdom, that one needs to let go of outcomes and be present. So it seems to me like you overlap both wisdom and creativity with your concept of negative capability. I guess my question is, one of your kind of criteria for selecting people was a situation where they have experienced tension.
Yes.
In their leadership. And one thing I'd like to say, you said one of your findings about negative capability and OCD, you talked about IPA is it's important not to generalize findings. I felt like that was a little bit too much generalization because it didn't happen in that many of your participants. So I just wanted to suggest you downtone that a little. But my main question is, how do you know your findings are about negative capability versus experiencing tension in the workplace? For example, the woman that felt like she was bullied.
Yes.
It seems to me like your results equate tension with negative capability, where you can have tension that isn't negative capability. It's not tolerating ambiguity or allowing paradox to exist without closing. So how do you parse your findings versus a leader who's experiencing tension versus a leader that's actually holding paradox?
Right.
And I'll mute myself to take the question offline, as they say on NPR.
Certainly. Annabelle, thanks a lot. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful observation. Of course, first about the generalization. I have to agree with you that maybe I was generalizing there, that is what they're specifically looking at in IPA. So, but moving on to your next part, which is about how do I know that what I discovered, the findings that I discovered or came across, specifically relate to negative capability and not just to a tension or uncertainty or predicament or perplexity, if you will. And as you well know, through the process of building this thing up, one of the things that I have struggled with is the aspect that I was unable to directly research negative capability. Well, and what do I mean by that? I mean that if I had a way of at the, I guess at the beginning stages, to specifically ascertain, for want of a better expression, through some examples, through maybe even a questionnaire, through some case scenarios that I share with the prospective participants, and they say, yeah, you know what? This is what I am experiencing as part of that. It would have been wonderful because I could have had this very homogenized group, a very purposive sample of people that had specifically experienced negative capability. So I think what I've ended up doing in this study is looking at aspects of negative capability which have been written about in the literature, which I have made sense of as I have interpreted, but may not necessarily shed light directly on the negative capability phenomena. And as a matter of fact, I believe it's in chapter 5, I very specifically make references to that, and I claim in my study that perhaps what I have looked at are aspects and not negative capability as a phenomena per se. So I don't know if I answer your question or not.
Yeah, that's good, Anil, and congratulations.
Thank you so much, Annabelle. I appreciate it. Let me just go to Steve, if he's there. Let me see where. Okay, Steve, you're on. Hi, Steve. Steve Shapiro. Hi, Steve. Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, Steve. Sorry about that.
Okay, very good. I think we were both muting, unmuting me.
Yeah.
Well, I'm in a state of negative capability here. Thank you for a very interesting presentation and for taking on such an ambitious dissertation, which, as you've said in your comment, Annabelle, reflect it's a very difficult thing to study, it being in a kind of negative state in as you've described it. And I think my question really was similar to what Annabelle raised and the conversation there, because it seems to me what you wound up studying, in a sense, was what makes it difficult for people to stay in a state of negative capability.
Yes.
Why the ways in which they flee from, we tend to flee from that state of uncertainty and retreat into action or OCD behaviors or what have you. So I think I would urge you, as you continue to write this up, to be clear about what it is you've found and can claim.
Yes.
And it's all very interesting, but you need to make sure what you're saying reflects what you actually discovered.
Yes.
I think, a question I have, and I think you started to get at this with Annabelle's question, but if, given that it was so hard to actually study the phenomenon that you were interested in, what if you were going to do your dissertation again or do another research study, how might you do it differently in order to enable yourself to do that?
Wonderful question, Steve. Thank you for raising that issue, and
Sure.
Thank you, Annabelle, for initiating that. It is definitely something that is on my radar that I've looked at, and Steve and Bob and I have also had some conversations around that. But Steve, just to answer your question, if I were to do this study all over again, and specifically work with the same phenomena, negative capability, I would possibly do it with folks who directly encounter that, can intellectually talk about that, and those who experience the phenomena every day. And I take the example of, let's say, therapists. Okay, I'm just taking that example. So if I were to work with psychotherapists who work with this phenomena day in and day out in their work with patients, in their work with clients, I'm not going to say I'm sure, but I think perhaps the data that would have emerged from those interviews would more shed more light directly on the negative capability construct, rather than the way I have done it, which was really, I thought I was doing a purposive sample, but it ended up not being too purposive. It ended up not being a sample where, everybody had experienced the same phenomena. So,
although with psychotherapists, they're not really, I mean, you could say they're leaders, but they're in a helping relationship with someone. So it's a different kind of
So if I were to look
context.
if I were to look at leaders, it would be, at this point, really, it'd be difficult for me to say, is there like a segment of the population that really deal with that within the organizational context? Who are these folks who really deal with that phenomena day in and day out? But this is certainly a question worth considering and to think about more deeply as I take this work further down the road.
Okay.
So thank you so much, Spiro. Thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciate it.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. Let me see. Let me try to go to Amy. Amy, are you on?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, great. I was not able to unmute or mute you for some reason there. So go ahead, Amy.
Yeah. Okay. I suppose it's a question, just a comment really, is along the same lines that we've been discussing.
Yes.
Because you initially had talked about pretty distinctly these three separate groups. And then what you've discovered is there really wasn't anything distinct between these three groups. But obviously you felt there would be. And I'm just wondering what transpired in there during your research process that, you concluded what you concluded. And along the same lines, I'm thinking, as you were talking about, maybe there's groups, sort of creative people, people that were working in creative industries, or that would really benefit much more from staying in negative capability. That there's in some ways business people, for instance, maybe it's not to their benefit to stay in negative capability. It's actually better for them to move through it and come up with a plan of action. I'm just wondering, if you had any further thoughts along that line.
The first part of your question is about, how did I make sense of, how did I find that, or create a finding out of when I was not very specifically looking at the context. So, given the fact that I had recruited people from those three contexts, as I was looking at the data and I was looking at the transcripts and each one of those narratives, it's sort of like, even though in my interview schedule there were no specific references to, okay, can you tell me about specifically how your work situation, how the work context in which you embedded maybe influencing the way you are. None of these. So I have to admit that there was not there. But as I looked at this, it did occur to me that for better or for worse, because I did a triangulated study, even though the context was not that critical, I would have kind of like stayed with the context. But I think towards the latter part of the study, Amy, I think you raised the issue about that context, which kind of like, it wasn't coming out clearly in the study, even though I was making references to the context at various parts of my dissertation. But so it was like almost like waiting for something to happen, which wasn't happening right out there. It's a difficult question to answer why I included that as a finding. Perhaps I've only included that as a finding maybe to sort of like catalyze some further thinking around that. Perhaps somebody else doing research on negative capability or any similar phenomena may want to look at how different contexts come into play. Okay, what is it about the work setting that may trigger those anxieties, or what is it about the work setting that even helps contain those anxieties? And to your point about the creative process, definitely this is something which is relatively new. It happened only it, about a week or 10 days ago when I read that study by Brent Russo, which is very revealing to me. I had not thought of negative capability. I knew it was sort of like a limitation, challenge, predicament, perplexity, but I really not looked at is as a constraint which may actually be helpful to the creative process. So yes, you definitely bring in a really important aspect, and I would be, I would definitely look at that as as I take this study further. So I don't know if I've answered your question or tried to or not, but that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think you actually did find something in your study. Now it's about comparing to some other group or context, as you say, and perhaps there's something distinct about that. So no, I think that you're absolutely onto something there. It's interesting.
Thank you so much, Amy, for all your support. I really appreciate it. All right,
You're
and I'm
welcome.
going to go to Sharon Davis Brown. Unmuting Sharon. Sharon, go ahead.
Hi, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. At least I can.
Okay, great. Congratulations. I thought it was an excellent presentation. I felt that you left no stone left unturned.
Thank you.
And I also was very interested in your topic about the empty space and negative capability, because I am a therapist, so it really does interplay into some of the work that I do. The work reminds me a little bit of Jungian analysts, the shadow, so that dark side, the unknowing, empty space. And I think that we all have those polarities on some level. Something that had come up, I don't really have a specific question, but something did come up when I was reading about the participants and their responses to your questions. And something I had commented about with you in regard to, even though you were interviewing professionals, several of them were talking about difficulties and challenges that they were having in their personal lives. And so how did that, again, affect their work relationship or what they were doing in their daily work? And I don't know if you ever really addressed that, or if you went down that path with them or not, or if it was any part of something that you wanted to delve into deeper as part of your research.
Yeah, is that your question?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So you and I had that exchange about this, right? And you very eloquently shared with me and with the rest of the committee that one of the things that was very perplexing to you was, or actually interesting / perplexing, was when I'm addressing those questions and knowing fully well that this was supposed to be about the workplace setting, why were those folks so interested in sharing experiences with deeply sensitive nature with me? Okay, to begin with. And so I take the example, no specific examples, but when I asked that question, they could have said, hey, I have an experience at work. I mean, these are people that don't know me, right? I'm a total stranger to them. Yes, I'm a researcher. They've signed the informed consent, or there's confidentiality. But this is something that I've not typically seen or observed, that people will start talking about their personal issues. So that is very intriguing to me. And I want to sort of dig a little bit deeper into that down the road, and perhaps even look at other avenues to see what might be happening there for people. Why did they feel so? Was it something about the way I interviewed them? Was it in the interview schedule, maybe? Was it the process that unfolded? Was it the setting? I don't know what it was. And this is, suppose, I think I'm comfortable not knowing at this point, Sharon, and seeing what unfolds. And maybe you and I can have further discussion about this down the road and see, how we can put our heads together about this. As a therapist, you can certainly shed light on this phenomena from your perspective. So, because some of the issues that did come up were actually quite troubling to me in those interviews. So so thanks.
Well, thank you.
All right, appreciate it. I'm going to go to some of the comments that I have here from some people. Let me first go to Steve Wallace. Steve, all right. Go ahead, Steve. I know you've put it in the chat box, but would you just share that with us? Go ahead.
Let me first congratulate you, Neil, on some great work. Taking the idea of negative capacity. Let's just say in normal scholarship, somebody would have seen that and said, oh, nobody's citing this, nobody's talking about it, therefore it's something that's completely unimportant to the scholarly community, where you have taken it and invested yourself in it and made it important, and I think have developed some very new and impressive insights. But just to be challenging for you, because I have to make, because this probably has not been stressful enough for you already. To what extent have you discovered something new here, and to what extent have you simply come up with a new name for something that already existed? And a way to differentiate between the two possibly is to identify how your new understanding might be used. For example, just to bop it back and forth between a couple of ideas, if your research into negative capacity has provided new insights into how other practices, such as Buddhist uncertainty, might be improved, or how this insights into negative capacity might serve to improve or gain new insights into human development or leadership development, where previous versions of this could not.
Yeah. And I can always trust you, Steve, to put the stress at the last minute to bring the hammer down. Bring the hammer down. All right. So let me say this. I mean, I could use the cop out and say, you know what? Let me be like that Buddhist scholar who says, let me just remain in the state of questioning, and see what emerges. But no, I'm not going to do that. Again, what I'm going to say is that clearly a lot has gotten stirred up for me in this entire process of research. Okay. And as I sit here right now, if I were to say that, oh, I know what I found, and yes, I've stated a few things, there's some findings, but what is something, to answer your question, what is it that's something brand new that I discovered about negative capability? I hate to bust your bubble, but if I were to say that typically what I've discovered, of course, with the exception of a few things, which are really like the OCD part, which I had not considered at all, the part about the intermingling of personal and professional lives in a state of quandary when leaders are in, that I had not considered. But other than that, there's nothing really earth-shattering that has come out from my entire study. So I want to be as honest as I possibly can with you. Now, that said, some new and emergent understandings could occur always, the unthought known. Maybe there's something happening right now. And on that note, if you'll allow me, I'm going to share two dreams that I had last night back to back. And honest to goodness. The first one was I'm going through a tunnel that is progressively narrowing, and I can distinctly hear a bus on my tail. Okay, and I'm running towards this tunnel, and the light that I see at the end of the tunnel is actually becoming more and more diminished. That was one. Two, I was at the airport, and I had a Canon camera, and something happened during that conveyor belt, when they put it through security, and I ended up with somebody else's camera. So I thought I'd share. I don't know what the meaning of these two dreams are, because I don't generally dream, but these dreams came to me last night on the eve of my FOR. So I just want to be very honest with you right now, Steve, that I don't know what I don't know right now. Okay. and I am comfortable with being in that negative capability frame of mind and seeing what possibly might develop, because there are possibly other avenues that I've not even looked at, and these will all come through my friend in our discourses with other colleagues and other people who will be touched in either directly or indirectly by the work that I've done.
And absolutely wonderful work that you've done. I look forward to more scholarly endeavors and continued investigations and wonderful conversations.
Thank you
Congratulations,
so
Anil.
much. All right, appreciate it. Let me go to Arzu real quick. Arzu said, let's see, I'm just going to a first question there. Okay. So I'm going to go to Somali. Somali asked a question, what were the deviant findings? Somalia, you could not use your mic. So can I take this offline with you, Somali? And just in the interest of time, because we're past the time boundary. Is that okay? All right. I guess she can't hear me. And then I have a question from Arzu. How did you design your interview questions? Was there any structured process and criteria so that you can retrieve relevant data? This was designed in consultation with my dissertation chair. He and I went back and forth through several drafts of the interview questions. And again, I can, if you would like, I can throw some more light into that off channel with you. And let me just go to the next one. I think you have landed into a space between coaches, although usually not trained in mental health. Why don't I just unmute you, Aaron? Okay, so you can talk about that. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, can you hear me okay, Anil?
Yes, I can.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, sir, congratulations. It's been a long ride, going back to 2001. So, you know, we've been talking up this stuff since then. So, congratulations again. One of the things that I've been interested in for a number of years is sort of the two areas of coaching and therapy, and I do both. And I've recently retired from the therapy world in pursuit of the organizational stuff. And I always find it fascinating that coaches often end up in this murky territory with their clients, and in many cases are not qualified to do that work. I mean, it can really be walking around in quicksand, you know. However, the clients volunteer it, so that makes it really interesting. And I believe that you have entered into this sort of space where how does one work with that? You know, I don't have much to say about it right now. I'm just excited by it.
All right, wonderful, wonderful. And thank you for making the time. And you and I will, of course, chat a lot about this.
Of course.
Down the road. But I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. Susan, let's just say Susan Kwashma, right? Let me just try to look for you. Okay, go ahead, Susan. You're unmuted. Hello? Susan? Okay, for some reason, Susan cannot be unmuted. But she says, congratulations, must go, so we'll miss the final questions. I'm pleased that I was of assistance. Susan was great in just helping me get some focus as I was developing my proposal. And thank you so much, Susan, for all your help. I appreciate it. Okay, so Sunita asked me a question. How do you see the theme intermingling of personal and professional life relate with negative capability? Sunita, I wish I had an immediate answer for you on that, but I don't. Why don't I unmute you? I just wanted to share with you. I appreciate that question. I do not have an answer for you why those two themes intermingled, but clearly that would be something I'd like to look at down the road.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, with that, I think, Anuradha, one question. Any reflection on influence of cultural background or gender on the possibility of strong negative? Interesting, very, very interesting questions, Anuradha. I wish we had a little more time, but we have passed about 10 minutes over the boundary. You and I can definitely discuss this a little bit more as I do some of the work on this. All right? Anuradha, if that's okay with you, I'd like to defer this to some other time. Is that okay, Anuradha? All right. I guess she can't listen. All right, Bob, are you still there? Bob? Bob, are you there? Let me call Bob real quick. I think we lost Bob there. Bob?
You have to unmute me.
Yes. I'm so sorry, Bob. This is what happens when one person has to do everything. Okay, go ahead, Bob. I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, well, let me just say one thing. First of all, I think that you have to be really careful as you really rethink your process, that you not fall into a regulative model and outside of the negative space that you're in now.
Yeah.
What I hear you saying in response to some of the questions is that it would be better were you not in negative space when you were asking about negative space. And that your participants not be in negative space when you ask them about negative space. And I think that you have a tendency here in your responses to try to escape the space that you're doing research on. And I really think you need to be careful. The academic experience is not based upon negative findings. And while even though we know that negative findings might be more important than basically something at the 0.01 level of significance. So I think that you really need to examine the congruity between what you're asking and where you're asking it from, and where you can remain in doing an analysis of what you have found. And I think that there's a tendency a bit in some of the conversations we've had, and even some of the questions that you've responded to here, to leave the space that you are in because of the tensions that it's created in you and in other people on the committee. So I really think that it would be an interesting kind of thing to discuss further.
Interesting.
In spite of all of this, or with regard to all of this, let me just announce to those on this line and those in the community that you are now Dr. Anil Behal. Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
Congrats, Dad.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I hope you have a bottle of something to experience.
Well, let's see what we have here.
Yeah, congratulations, Anil.
All right. Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
I appreciate all your time, and I apologize we went over by about 10 or 15 minutes, but we had a late start. So thank you again for all of you for being there for me, with me. And Bob, thanks again for being there despite the technical difficulties we had.
No problem.
Thanks again. All right, appreciate it. All right, so I'm good to.
Congratulations.
All right, appreciate it, sir, and we'll be in touch. All right.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, Dad.
Bye. Take care, sweetheart. Bye.
Love you. Bye.
Love you.